I'm Kate Hildreth, and today I'm online with Louis, who is a special guest. Louis grew up in California and began real estate over there, living in a suburb of Los Angeles. He had many friends that were involved with the feature film industry in Hollywood. He was raised Catholic, and through a series of strange events, he began to question some of the most basic aspects of life, the media, the scriptures, and certain traditions. So he started to question the truth behind certain historical events, the real motivation behind the need for power. So he started asking questions like, who's shaping the narrative? And of course, the big question, what is evil? So for his search for answers to these important questions opened his eyes to the spiritual battle that is all around us. This led Louis to undertake specialized training to study those spiritual battles. So in 2011, he joined the world's leading exorcists and theologians in Rome to undertake the Catholic Church's training and gain certification in the specialized area of exorcism, which we'll get into in a moment. Since that time, as a layperson, he's worked as a consultant, private and corporate, speaker, and teacher. He assists in church-approved exorcisms and, with church permission, remediates many other types of anomalous phenomena. He is a producer, creator, and host of Behind the Veil, which is a radio show that airs every Monday on WBRTcountry.com. His show, Behind the Veil, is a commentary on world events as seen through the lens of spiritual warfare. Welcome, Louis.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you. So before we delve into some of these big questions, let's back up a little bit. You started off your professional career as a real estate agent in California, and you had lots of friends in sort of the Hollywood area. So what was that like, and what were some of the things that you witnessed in that industry back then that kind of contributed to your asking these questions about who shapes the narrative and what is evil?
Well, so the friends that I had back then that were in the film industry, they are still in the film industry. So being a real estate agent, it gave me the opportunity to free up some time. Pardon me. So as some of your listeners may know, being a realtor is not a 9-to-5 job, right? You can do a couple of transactions a month and make a pretty good living. And so I was able to have the time to be able to look into other parts of life, right? I had time and I was young, I had money, and so I started hanging around these guys that I knew from high school, and one friend in particular, his father was an illustrator for many movies in Hollywood, and some of you would know these movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Patriot Games, and movies that were pretty big at the time. And his son, which was my friend, he also became a storyboard artist and an illustrator. And so we would hang out together. We would go on movie sets, and he invited me to work with him on a couple of projects, which were interesting. We did some special effects on a couple of movies and that kind of thing. And the more I hung around that atmosphere, the more we saw. And at one point, my friend was asked to do set up the backdrop for an event, which was it was a bacchanal, right? It was like an orgy situation. So he backed out of that. But, those things are very prevalent over there. There's actually a movie called Eyes Wide Shut. And that movie explains a lot about the Hollywood, the whole Hollywood scene. It's very truthful, and if you guys get a chance, it's also well, how should I say, very permissive in what it shows. It shows nudity and that kind of stuff, and but it's all about these power people in Hollywood and how they become compromised in many ways, or they've got to make some kind of deal to advance. And so it's an interesting situation. So I started questioning things about that time, and that was in the mid '80s, and so it was a long time ago.
So you studied exorcism. And for those that don't know what that is, can you just briefly explain what that is?
Yeah. So there are a couple of different categories of exorcism. So exorcism is part of every major religion. Okay, every major religion has had exorcists. You could call them. Because the problem of evil exists everywhere. It's universal. It doesn't confine itself to the borders of a religion. So everybody throughout history has had to be able to confront that evil and to deal with it somehow. And so I grew up Catholic. I got away from the church for a long time, 80s era. And but I started, questioning a lot of these things, a lot of things that I couldn't explain, certain phenomena that happened in my life, and I ended up coming back to the church because I started seeing that every other religion that had issues with their demons, right, would end up going to the Catholic Church and getting a Catholic exorcist to deal with their issues. And so this was the common denominator. I don't know if I should call it a common denominator, but it's kind of like the decision maker for me. And I figured, if this Catholic Church has the power to deal with demons from all other faiths, this is the church that is true, at least for me. So I mentioned that there's a couple of different kinds of exorcism. In the Catholic Church, they call it minor exorcisms and solemn exorcisms. And minor exorcisms is what I, as a layperson, can do, since I've been trained for that. And that is, there are various forms of demonic influence. We call it extraordinary demonic influence, because we're all influenced by the devil, all of us, right? And that's in our daily lives. We experience temptations or situations where we're confronted with decision making, and it's either good or bad, right? It can be the decision within the realm of good, but sometimes we're confronted with either good or bad, and those are temptations. And so when that's ordinary influence of the devil. I'm talking about extraordinary influence of the devil. And that's when there's a demon. We believe that there are fallen angels. We believe in that reality. And through anecdotal evidence, that's very true, the reality of that. The church has always proclaimed that since 2,000 years. And even Israel before that understood the reality of angels and the fallen angels as part of creation, the consequence of a bad decision making by some of these angels after creation. Anyways, so extraordinary influence of the devil works in various ways. It can work through obsessions, when somebody is so obsessed with something that their way of life changes because of this issue that they're dealing with. That's an obsession where nothing else really makes sense without them thinking of this first and acting upon this one issue that they're dealing with. That's an obsession. and it can be a demonic thing. There is, there's oppression, and we all feel oppression right now throughout our society because of our circumstances, because of the political circumstance or the economic circumstance. Well, picture oppression focusing in just on you, right? Well, that's what the demon does. He oppresses you to a certain point where you can no longer function properly. You become lethargic. You become your way of thinking changes because of this sucking out of energy, or this feeling of heaviness that's upon you.
Mm-hmm.
That's oppression. There's also vexation, where you're actually you confront a demon physically, where a demon will actually hit you, and you will actually bruise up and get cuts and strange things,
Mm-hmm.
and the medical profession, by the way, knows about this stuff, but they never talk about it because
Mm-hmm.
they can't explain it. Psychologists, they know about this stuff, but they never talk about it because they can't explain it. There is a doctor, psychologist, his name is Dr. Peter Gallagher, and he wrote a book about this because he's dealt with the demonic for about 30 years now. And he's one of the psychologists that exorcists go to before they do an exorcism. But anyways, we'll get into that. So oppression also deals with hauntings, or we call them infestations.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when there are physical disturbances in a home or a business or a hotel, somewhere like that, where you hear noises at night or even during the day. You can hear voices. Things can actually move. It doesn't always have to be real scary, but sometimes it is. Sometimes there's very loud noises, or something that is trying to scare you. And that's really the purpose of these things. It tries to unbalance you, and kind of unhinge your psyche. And by doing that, the demon tries to control you through fear. That's his goal. And so minor exorcisms are when people like me go in there and we deal with that kind of thing. We speak with the people, or we go into the property and we cast those demons out. Right? We don't do it. The power of God does that. The power of Jesus does that. So a solemn exorcism, on the other hand, is when a person has somehow opened a door into their lives where a demon can actually come in and possess part of their body. They don't necessarily possess the whole body, but part of their body. And at that point, the person no longer has control of that part of their body. If it controls the whole body, then the demon will, the person will go into a trance, and the demon will then start articulating through the person's body, and they will act through their body. They will talk through their body, this kind of thing. And you see that really in the scriptures, where, and I don't mean to be real religious, but you're asking me about exorcism. And so, but there's a situation where Jesus he's asked to go see the son of a man who the man says is possessed, and nobody can control this guy. He's broken chains, and he just, he's really uncontrollable. He's experiencing a lot of strange things. And so Jesus goes to this guy. He's living in a place where it's deserted because he can't be around people. And when Jesus talks to him, the demon answers back. And the demon says, "I am Legion," right? And so that evidence is that, and further evidence, but that's evidence that that person has lost his identity, and he's become so possessed that the demon has taken over his personality and is talking in his place. And we see this happening with people who are possessed. But they're recognizing that in their lives. That's the cool part, because they recognize that something's wrong and they want help. And that's why they call on an exorcist, right? Now, another form of possession, which is very scary, is that when a person gives himself over to the demon and accepts the possession. That's the scary part, because then the person is acting in accord with the will of the demon. And so you won't recognize that unless you know what to look for. But this person could be your doctor, or he can be your lawyer, or he can be a person in your office that you don't even realize is possessed, because they don't exhibit any symptoms of possession because they're not fighting it. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting.
You talked a little bit about, different doors that could be opened. And so Ouija boards are kind of trendy. Are there other kind of trendy, kind of new age things that you've seen that are very much a red flag for you, that to the average person, like on social media or something, like the Wiccan movement and stuff like that? Like it's portrayed as like cool and stuff on social media, and people, make videos or whatever and stuff like that. So what are some kind of trendy things like that you've seen lately increase as well?
Well, Ouija board is a big deal, right? It's still a big deal. It was a big deal back in the, when it was invented back in, I don't know, the 30s or whatever. Mm-hmm. The famous story of the movie The Exorcist, that actually happened to a boy. And it started out with a Ouija board. And so that's how the devil came into his life, and he became possessed through that, through the use of a Ouija board. That happens still. So, the whole thing about Wiccans and all that stuff is that, the bottom line is that man, and when I say man, I mean women also, don't get offended, anybody who's listening.
So offended.
But man is curious by nature. And sometimes he wants to know things that he's not meant to know, And so I think that is one of the primary, I guess, maladies of our era, right? And wanting to know forbidden knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. And what I mean by forbidden is that, for instance, in the Old Testament, God talks about do not contact the dead. And the inverse is that, well, the dead can be contacted, right? So don't do it. He's telling you straight away, do not do this, because it can be done, but it means you shouldn't do it, right? And so, so when people say, do you believe in ghosts? I say, of course I believe in ghosts, right? First of all, I've experienced ghosts, but just reading the scriptures, you have to believe in ghosts, right? You have to believe in that contact with the dead is possible, but it should not be done. Why? Because it's against God's will. And why go against God? What happens when you go against God's will? Well, what happens is that you're no longer under his protection. And what happens then is that you are cannon fodder for the devil, right? You are, see, the devil's a fallen angel, and he's still an angel. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. So he retains his angelic qualities, which means that he's exceptionally intelligent, way more intelligent than man. He knows man better than anybody else. He knows you and he knows me better than we know ourselves. So he knows he can't read minds. There's a limit there placed by God. So he can't read your mind. He can't read your innermost thoughts. Only God can. That's a comfort. Okay. But what he can do is he can read people. He can read, you've got people who can, that show Lie to Me, right?
Mm-hmm. Like a light
That
to shine
show, it
light.
was a very cool show, by the way. Tim
Mhm.
Roth, awesome. But that's an example of how to read people, right?
Mhm.
By micro expressions and things like that. Well, the devil is an expert at that, and he will even look at when you get goosebumps or the dilation of your eye, just a tiny dilation. If anything affects you, right? If anything entices you, and you're trying to play it off, he will recognize that, whereas nobody else will. And so that's where he knows where to strike, right? What words to use, what images to present. And what he uses, his backyard is your mind, right? And I said he can't read thoughts, but he uses thoughts. He can inject thoughts into your imagination, into your intellect, and he also uses memories. And so he will combine the three sometimes, like concentric circles, right? Where they overlap, he can combine some of those things, and in that way, he can really seduce you into thinking like he does, right? Remember, we are made in God's image, right? We're told since we're young that we're made in God's image. Our faith tells us that. The Bible tells us that. And what the devil wants is he wants to remake us into his image. So instead of doing God's will, he wants us to do his will. So instead of being like God, his image and likeness, that likeness will change to the devil's likeness, because we'll do things like the devil does, right? So it's an interesting thing.
So let's pivot a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about your show, Behind the Veil. So you talk a lot about current events through a spiritual warfare lens. So what are some examples of current events you've been discussing lately, and that kind of spiritual warfare perspective?
Well, first of all, let's clarify spiritual warfare. So spiritual warfare, we understand that we're living in two worlds. We're living in a physical world, and we also live in a spiritual world at the same time. I was a real estate agent for years, right? So I relate things to real estate sometimes. And so what I see is the devil gaining real estate. It's like a football game, right? Where you gain yardage. Well, the enemy's gaining yardage every time he takes one of your loved ones down or leads them in the wrong way, or maybe yourself. And so he's gaining ground. We need to take that ground back. And the way we do that is through spiritual warfare. So what I talk about on my show is I talk about world events, right? We talk about whatever's in the media that week, and we bring it into that spiritual reality. So the Great Reset, for instance, that's a big deal. And it's going to get bigger and bigger as the weeks go by. The Great Reset is the architect behind this is what the Freemasons call the great architect of the universe. It's Lucifer, right? By the way, that's who the Freemasonic God is. And so, anyways, I do talk about that as well. But the architect of that is demonic. It's Luciferian. Now, there's a difference between satanic and Luciferian, and maybe we won't get into that today. But part two, yeah. So the Great Reset is part of it is a depopulation agenda, and the reason this is happening, and the transgender movement is part of that Great Reset, by the way, and so is the banking crisis that we will soon witness in this country. That's part of the Great Reset. It's a great takedown of our freedoms. And the reason why I say it's a spiritual warfare issue is because, first of all, it's a global thing. When the pandemic hit, it was a global thing. People acted like right away, all across the board, right? All the leaders of governments went into lockdown. Boom, right away, everybody at the same time. This is orchestrated, right? There was no sovereignty involved in that, sovereignty of nations. This was a well-orchestrated, pre-planned event. Now, I'm going to go back in time a little bit. Back in 1992, I was writing a tabloid-sized newspaper. It was called the Global Observer. And at that time, we were writing about the agenda of these globalists at that time. And we were talking about the Maastricht Treaty at the time. Europe was still in separate countries, but we were talking about Europe coming together as a European Union. And Europe still has separate currencies, and we were talking about a one European currency, which was in the works at that time. Anyways, so this has been in process for a very long time, even before '92. Back, when the we can talk about Albert Pike back in the 1800s and people like that, but that'll be part two too also. But anyways, so the Great Reset, we see that as demonic because it wants the destruction of the human person. And not just the destruction, but the degrading of the morality of the human person. This is a spiritual aspect, no doubt about it. And it's not just degrading the morality, but it's also degrading the dignity of the human person. They want to start Tyson Foods. I just read Tyson Foods is now they're grinding up bugs, and they're making new meat patties and stuff out of bugs.
Really? So, oh my gosh.
So it's an incredible thing. And so they want to degrade us into animals. But you know what? We're not animals. We're made in the image of God. I love my dog and cat, but they're not made in the image of God. All right? I am. And so there's a difference between the human being and the dignity of the human person and the dignity of a dog or a cat, right? And so people need to understand that. But the globalists, they want to blur that line so much that you don't recognize it anymore. And so that's the agenda of the devil, because we are made in God's image. The devil hates God, but the devil cannot attack God. But he can attack his image, and that's us. And that's why it's important to recognize all these things that are happening are the result of the devil's hatred toward God. And he's acting out, he's manifesting that through these powers that be, who aren't even elected, these globalists, who are imposing a dehumanizing agenda upon us, because it's the devil's agenda.
So with the Great Reset and the problems that are arising with the globalists and just the way things are going, I think it's pretty easy to get kind of overwhelmed reading all of these things and just thinking about like how bad this could get like fairly soon. So on maybe a more positive note, what do you think are some practical measures that people can take, both spiritually, but also like, physically in their life to prepare for these things? Because I think it's easy to feel like you're just waiting for all hell to break loose. So it might help to feel like you can do a little something about it to prepare yourself.
Right. And that's one thing that that I really like, is because there's hope, right? Mm-hmm. And part of hope is that that we survive this, right? We hope that we survive this. And we do that by preparing, like you said, physically and spiritually. The basis of our hope, though, is spiritual. It's always spiritual, right? That's the first thing. And then the physical. So spiritually, close up those holes, those portals, those doors that you've opened up in your life. Close them up, right? Confess them to God. You know, if you're Catholic, go to a Catholic priest. If you're not, confess them to God, however your religion dictates. But you need to get right with God one way or another, okay? Because time is getting short with lots of things. Now, on the physical side, I suggest looking at our banking system, because it's not going to survive very much longer. We're not going to recognize it pretty soon. Just within the last couple of days, Bank of America came out and they said that our economy and the dollar is going to be devastated this year. Okay, so the way I suggest to prepare is taking logical steps, right? Preparing with food and water, right? But also maybe buying silver. I would, Bitcoin is making records. It's like over $70,000 for a Bitcoin now. It's kind of crazy. But I don't trust that. It's based on an algorithm,
I honestly never understood Bitcoin. I mean, it's possible that I wasn't interested in it enough to like sit down and try to understand it. But to me, it just seems like the computer is saying, here's a coin, but like what do you do with that? Like it's just there. Like it's not,
right.
It just,
well, you end up selling it for dollars. You trade it like a different currency, you trade it for dollars. But at the same time, it's, I don't believe in its soundness, because it is based on a computer algorithm, you know, and it's like, what's backing it? Nothing. just like the dollar. Right?
Well, yeah, pretty much.
So why would you invest in it, right? So I would invest in those precious metals that have stood the test of time. And somebody talks a lot about this that I really like to listen to is Mike Adams, the Health Ranger. Mm-hmm. He's really good about articulating this point, and that is that precious metals have lasted the test of time. They've endured the test of time, and whenever the going gets rough, countries always resort to these two metals, and I think that's important in today's time, in our current time. I think precious metals are really the way to go. I know they're really not practical at this point to be trading for, taking a bag of coins to trade for a car or something. But so we have to, navigate this, how would you say, I guess just navigate this changing time that we're living through the best we can. And of course, we're always going to have to use the currency that's most available to us, so we can operate practically. But at the same time, we need to save some of our money in these precious metals, because that's what's going to give us a hedge against the falling dollar. BRICS just came in, the BRICS nations, right? Mm-hmm. It's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, plus a lot of the Indonesian countries which are joining. They are now presenting a currency that's backed with gold, and which is going to give confidence to a lot of, for instance, the Saudi Arabian countries, Saudi Arabia, mm-hmm. Middle Eastern countries, and they're going to end up dumping the dollar and picking up that other currency. Now, I'm not a currency guy anymore. I used to trade currencies, but I haven't been in that for a long time. But I do keep up on it a little bit, and what I see is that the dollar is weakening every day, and we need to take precautions. And one way is like I said, food, ammo, is another area. If you don't believe in guns, then I'm
Learn
sorry.
to.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a time where we may have to hunt for our food. That's not out of the realm of possibility. I live in the country, so for me, it's more of a practical thing. I suggest people getting out of the city, because the cities are going to be the main areas hit by whatever chaos is coming. And then since you're going to be living out of the city, hopefully, or you live out of the city now, be careful and guard your home, because those people in the city that are fleeing, guess where they're going to go? They're going to go to your house, because they know that you're prepared, right? You've got food, you've got this stuff that they need. Mm-hmm. And so just, but this is, like I said, this is orchestrated. This is something that the globalists know will happen. These guys are smart, right? They've got a plan. They've planned this out since a long time ago. And they know human psychology. They know how we operate. And in many ways, they've conditioned us already for this stuff, how to act. And they know what we'll do in a crisis situation. So if I were, what I'm going to do is prepare that way, and but get my spiritual house in order before anything else. That's really the key.
Yeah. Well, you heard him, everybody. You have homework, spiritual and physical, to prepare for these weird times that we're living in that seem to be getting worse and worse. Thank you for joining me today, Louis. It sounds like we have plenty of content to go over in a part 2.